Hey, everybody, this is Maha,
And this is Dylan.
and we're the hosts of That Wasn't Too Hard. And today's episode, we're actually going to talk to you about Poka Yoke. Isn't that right, Dylan?
That's absolutely right.
It's not like the polka, it's not close to it, but it's good enough. So, how about this, Dylan? Tell me a little bit about Poka Yoke.
So it started, as with all things, in the 80s and 70s in Japan and Toyota. And it started with this guy, Shingo, but it's really just a modern word for a really old concept of stopping yourself when you're gonna make a mistake. That's all there is to it.
So, almost like foolproofing.
Yeah, I think it literally means exactly that. And so you're absolutely right.
Yep. From what I read, it was called baka proofing, basically, which means idiot proofing or foolproofing.
Right. Yeah. That reminds me of, let's cut this part.
Okay.
You're absolutely right. And they decided to be more respectful and not call some of their employees idiots. And so they translated it to mistake proofing, I think is the current wording.
Yep. First book was called Baka, then they called it mistake proofing, which makes a lot of sense, actually, especially with how it transitioned from people all the way to services too.
Yeah. And there are a lot of applications today that we're going to get into in today's podcast, but where I first learned about it was in Shigeo Shingo's book, the Toyota production system. It's small and it's green, and it's got a lot of technical details about how to set up a manufacturing plant. But he spends a lot of time talking about this because done right, a Poka Yoke allows you to spend no extra time to detect or prevent a problem. And seeing how you can deliver those mechanisms into your processes can really reduce the failures that you get, especially failures that are going to you're not going to notice until they become more expensive.
Especially at post-production, right?
Right. Yeah. All these people are going to mess with it and add value and waste their time, and you could have just fixed it in the first place.
So tell me then, Dylan, how did they come up with Poka Yoke? What was the problem?
So the base problem in Toyota was they had people inserting things backwards, or they had people bolting things on in the incorrect direction. And so the most common example is they'd have like a template up. And so after you did your bolting or something, you'd stick it up there and it was like contoured to fit. And if it didn't fit just right, you screwed up, right? And so it took just seconds for you to grab your bolted piece, you stick it up there, and sometimes they'd even make a buzzer sound to make it clear you screwed up. And of course, there's no like deep issue with you screwing up. People screw up. It's just there to remind you this is an easy thing to fix right now.
Yeah, it's basically funny enough what we talked about last time when it comes to failing fast, right? It is about failing fast. It really supports you with failing fast.
Right. Yeah, you want to be fast about knowing you have failed, because failure just is part of that human nature. We're going to do it, and it's about recovering quickly from it.
And I like that. And it reminds me of an example that you even gave about the USB, which we should touch on a bit later when it comes to, well, I wish I had a buzzer for every time I misfit the USB. No, misfit is another word, but fit the USB in the wrong way.
Right. There's that famous meme where you put it in one way and then you turn it around, and then you put, like, it's only on the third time that the USB ever fits.
Because it's just the part of life, basically. But no. So tell me a little bit more, Dylan, on how he came up actually with Poka Yoke, and how did that actually even help Toyota streamline their manufacturing process even quicker?
Right. So it allowed them, they had some other mistakes that or processes that didn't work very well for inventory control, and a Poka Yoke helped them detect and make it really obvious when a bad product was invisibly messing people up. So one of their earlier inventory control systems was they'd have parts that would come and they'd go around on a carousel. You can think of like a baggage claim or something where the parts come out, and then there'd be like workers with their riveting guns or something around it.
Mm-hmm.
And they were supposed to pick it up and rivet and then put it on like a cart behind them.
Interesting.
And this didn't work because there would be bad parts that would come down, and they would eventually just clog up the carousel. And so they didn't have anything to do with these. And so there was this kind of buildup of waste product that didn't fit, or it wasn't ideally to spec, and it would just kind of sit there. With the Poka Yoke, they could better detect, is this going to work or not, which prevented some of those systems. And it also allowed them to move more into single piece flow, where it comes in, you do your thing, it goes out, and you're not doing this kind of batch or decoupled processing of inventory.
That's actually really interesting too, because when you think about it, it sounds pretty, it sounds like there are different types. So you talked about the buzzard. So that's one way of knowing that you screwed up. What are some of the other ways that were quite useful on the plant for that matter too? Let's talk about how much they actually even cost, if anything.
Right. Yeah. Well, I think it depends. And when you're running a plant and you're thinking about it as like a CFO or even a GM, any change has costs, because you have to consider the cost. It takes like people's thought to deliver. Fine. But often they can be cheap. I know of some manufacturing companies that have really run with this idea, getting down to their 3 parts per million defect rate with extensive Poka Yoke, sometimes 100 in a plant, where they will scan both sides, a barcode, they'll scan the label, they'll have 3 different labels that come off the same printer, they'll put them on, they'll still scan them all. They might have, this actually shows up sometimes in FDA products, where you'll have a box with some sort of part that you're buying, and the inside of the pouch that's inside the box has to have exactly the same label as the outside of the box. So the FDA checks you on this, right? You really want to make sure that, I don't know, some sort of med device you're going to stick in somebody is exactly the part you thought you were getting, you pulled off the shelf. There are some others with automatic measurement, where it comes down the line, it gets measured. I know that Coca-Cola was pretty vocal about some Six Sigma efforts that allowed them to very precisely fill the bottles of pop, and this, they were able to save millions, or at least they claimed they were. And I have to imagine, I haven't been to a Coke bottling plant, but I have to imagine that this in part was due to some really focused measurement of volume and some better ways of determining that exactly the right amount goes in and detecting if it's wrong in an automated way. So
Dylan, when it came to Poka Yoke being used by other industries and other manufacturers, how did that happen? Any examples?
So this is the ironic bit. This idea has been around forever. It's just, this is the word we use for it now. In a sense, this has been around since the 1300s. The earliest example that really strikes me of effective Poka Yoke is the double entry bookkeeping system, where you have credits on one side, and you have debits on the other side. And this replaced like a single ledger. And the big advantage to a system like this is you are thinking with both sides of your heads when you're thinking about money coming in and going into a different account. They have to line up at the end of the day.
Yep.
And you're stopping yourself from making mistakes about just clerical mistakes about where the money is coming from or going. And that system has been so successful, just a simple way of detecting mistakes that doesn't take a lot of extra effort. We're still doing it today. It's 700 years old plus. And there are other examples, and I think a lot of people find this intuitive when they see it. But I think there's a lot of good advantages in thinking strategically about how you can apply it to your own life. Another good example is do you remember maybe 5 years ago, Gmail came out with a little alert that it noticed when you were typing, and you said, I'm attaching this document. And Gmail, if you didn't attach a document and you said that in your email, it would pop up a little thing that said, I noticed you didn't attach a document. Are you sure? And usually it was right. Usually you forgot. And that's a very simple thing for them to build. And man, it has saved me quite a number of times. And I know that Microsoft copied it a couple of years later.
Yep, it did actually.
These are, yeah, a really easy thing to do. And I think it helps everybody's quality of life.
So this would be kind of a warning type of Poka Yoke, right? Similar to the buzzard, for example. But what is something like a control type that you see being used even today?
Those are a lot harder outside of the factory. You're thinking more like a preventative.
Yes.
Yeah, I think those are harder to apply because when you're doing work, having a system that corrects your work or just ensures that it's done in the right way can be dangerous when the work is not standard. When people are making judgment calls about how they use a tool, that it's dangerous to do that for people.
No worries.
Sometimes you see it with like you're doing shipping, you're buying something on some website and you put in your address and you know your address, but they have a connection out to the postal service and they try to match your address to something in the postal service.
Server. Yeah.
Right. And it adds your 9-digit zip and it puts it all in caps and it's all very formal. And you know why they do it, because they have 1% of packages returned from people who mistype their address. Like that makes sense from their side, but it's dangerous to force people into like correcting their address because maybe the post office gets it wrong and you do know what you're talking about. I used to live on 24th and a half Street, and man, I cannot tell you the number of websites that just did not want to ship me anything for that reason. So it's harder to do preventative Poka Yoke outside of the factory. Okay.
Well, that's really good to know, actually.
Do you have any examples of preventative Poka Yoke that you've seen outside of a factory?
I mean, if I want to think about Poka Yoke and data analytics sometimes, that would usually be in relation to, for example, in Python, you can't really force your, well, I wouldn't say that. Never mind. I'll pause on that one. Let me think.
You could talk about data types and how JavaScript is more dangerous with letting you be fast and loose with different variable types.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I was trying to formulate with Python because it doesn't allow you usually to force a data type on a column, which is actually really great. And then when it comes to detection, you can automate it. But again, if I want to think about automation and kind of data types as well, a lot of people complain about how Excel sometimes automates your data types for you. And that's,
Mhm.
would that be a failed Poka Yoke in this case?
Yeah, I think so. That's kind of the narrative that I want to say. It's like the legacy of Clippy, right? That the
Oh,
computer
yes.
knows better than you about what you want to do. That's a dangerous path to go down. And it makes sense in a factory because you want to do things the same way every time. And in a factory, when you're doing millions of bottles an hour, you can think hard about correcting the cap placement when it goes sideways. But when people are using Excel for all sorts of different reasons, the auto format of dates is sometimes unhelpful to them.
Okay. So I'm gonna maybe ask a really dangerous question here, or controversial question, but then how do you think something like Poka Yoke could prevent errors that usually occur in things such as machine learning with this black box approach? Yeah. Oh, look at that juicy smile. There we go.
This is like the everybody
wants it.
Let me think for a second.
Take your time.
I think that is one of the potentially best tools we have to addressing the problems of machine learning. Because in such a black box approach, you run the risk of garbage in, garbage out. And the case of Oakland, where they put in all the arrest records, and it turns out that all the arrests were in poor parts of town, and then their machine learning predicted that poor parts of town would be where arrests or where crime was going to happen. Well, no shit, Sherlock. And if you don't do root cause determination of your model, then you're very at risk for that. And when I was in grad school, what we often did when we did like some sort of fitting to experimental data, my professor would always say, you may not use the whole data set to fit your model because you're going to overfit it. Your data set in particular is just going to have some oddities, and you're going to assign real big coefficients to unrelated causes because that's just part of it. You're p-sniping. And so what he said is you can fit your data your model to 2/3 and then use the last third to validate. But you can't use more than 2/3 to fit a model. And I think that has applications to machine learning. It's not exactly a Poka Yoke, but some sort of reality check for the model that's generated is a critical part of a successful machine learning model. And I think that the best machine learning companies do understand this, and that's why you get the choose all of the pictures with the stoplight sort of thing. They're collecting data to see how well their machine learning model does at predicting that.
And at the same time, when you think about it, knowing what you're actually doing sometimes really helps. I forgot what the word is called, but it's when you have knowledge of, let's say, an area like Oakland, and you're like, well, looky here, these are the poor neighborhoods. Are we doing the right thing? So actually, that's maybe a better example for our root cause analysis episode for sure. But it still has a little bit of Poka Yoke in it. They are intertwined in that, in the way that they try to proof models and prevent them from future error, much like hopefully in the future as well, preventing something like Zillow from overestimating the prices of houses and selling them through the model without a human checking on them.
That's a fantastic example.
I love that example.
They could have done more checking, more verification on their model. You know, another one you make me think of is that has become really useful as a preventative Poka Yoke is the modern DevOps movement has this concept of servers should be cattle, not pets. And what they mean by that is you need to manage them at scale. There should not be anything special about any particular server, about like, it shouldn't take any manual effort to recreate a server. You shouldn't need any hands-on keyboards to rebuild it. And key to delivering this sort of vision is, oh, and by the way, if you do achieve that vision, you get massive resiliency benefits, because if someone comes and knocks over your whole data center, you just plug in a bunch of computers and push the button, and all of your, your not pushing button cattle just kind of repopulate into the compute, and it's like magically resilient. Critical to delivering this capability was a preventative Poka Yoke of Ansible and Chef and Puppet, where you define what the computer needed to look like. And if the computer didn't look like that, if it had a different configuration, if it didn't match exactly what it needed to, Ansible would come and overwrite it, and it would say, no, you need to look like what I think you need to look like. And it would also send it a little alert. And if a computer went too long or it had too many failed overwrites where it had the wrong thing and Ansible had to come in and fix it, Ansible would say, there's something goofy going on here. Someone keeps messing around with the configuration. And it might be compromised. It might be someone bad in there. And
so like malware, etc. That's how it detects malware. Okay.
Yeah. So repeated application of a preventative Poka Yoke in this DevOps world has become a preventative Poka Yoke for a different sort of failure mode.
I love this because I didn't know it was so intertwined into cybersecurity either.
Yeah. And building things in predictable ways, that is an approach that gets you a lot of security mileage. Just making the surprises apparent and the having the most critical parts of your work, the most at-risk part of your work, very predictable, so you can see when something is goofy.
So I love this because it really touches back on even how we need to, when you think about it, even dissect a process into simple, smaller processes. And by doing that, you're able to monitor, you're able to audit, and you're able to Poka Yoke as well.
Yes. Yeah, building that prevention into every step, checks before it gets too far. I think that's a really good thing that we can do in all of our lives. Even beyond industry, I've seen this apply to, like, Alcoholics Anonymous uses this model. Yeah. Where, I mean, everybody's plan is different, but you have certain things that you're not going to do. There's a lot about being honest with yourself, which I think also the thought leaders in Toyota Production System would also be very attuned to.
Yep.
But once you become honest and you start doing your step work of continuous improvement and making amends and examining yourself, you don't want to go past this line, because for you, going past this line is going to put you in a bad situation. For a lot of people, it's just straight up drinking. They don't want to start that path. But for others, it's just, I know that if I get into this social situation, that's the point at which that I go too far. And so I can't, that's my line. And so even in a social way, we construct Poka Yokes to stop or prevent a bad outcome or a defective part or all this wrongness that we want to prevent downstream where it'll be more expensive to handle.
I love it because you know what? You're touching on another great thing, which is self-awareness and process awareness.
Mm-hmm.
On one hand, it's process awareness, is knowing how your processes work. So if you haven't done the process mining, you better do it. That's going to help you basically save a lot of mileage, just like you said. That process mining is important. And on the human side, it's the self-reflection piece of just knowing yourself well enough to know, you know what, I always screw up that dial. I just don't put it in the right way. There's probably a good way to fix it. And as I was reading, it was about like putting the screw in or putting like the spring in before, so they can know that they haven't added it eventually. Just changing it a little bit. Again, behavior change. Something as simple as a behavior change that could actually turn into a Poka Yoke, which is cheap. Well, cheaper than inspection. It's cheaper than inspection for sure. Or quality assurance.
Yeah.
Zero quality assurance. Let's talk about that too, maybe.
And we will talk about the cost of assurance in a future episode. But you're absolutely right. Poka Yokes are one of the cheapest ways to reduce the cost of defects and reduce the cost of failures and reduce the cost of even inspection. Yes, deep truth.
Deep truth. Namaste as well for us, because we are our inspectors eventually. And by inspecting less, we are more aligned, I guess, with our universal selves. I don't know how I said that, but it makes a lot of sense somehow. So I'm just going to take it in a deep breath and just realize I said something that I should really live by. But no, is there anything else you think? What about some of the maybe broader, we talked a little bit about the broader applications. We talked about even the applications on the human side a little bit. And I really love your example with Alcoholics Anonymous. Is there anything else that you want to think about? Even on the regulatory side, maybe.
Yeah, I think it's fun to watch regulatory and kind of voices that have an interest in quality, but not a direct hand in executing it.
That's a really good point, actually. Roles.
They're always going to be a little bit behind. They're a conservative voice, to be sure. And it's really fun to watch those voices gain certainty and about what
needs to happen.
Quality, what quality looks like, even across many different industries or operational models. How can they, even from a governance design, how can they train their auditors to know what to look for? And I think Poka Yokes are really gaining steam in a quality audit. I know the FDA cares. We've talked about that. They have a really rigorous, man. If you want to get a taste of some really strong quality oversight, go look up the PQs and the IQs and the OQs. The FDA really
drills them in.
I mean, you got to be so tight, or they will shut you down.
You know what? That is actually a good use of that for sure. But if I'm getting some sort of thing stuck in me, man, I want to be sure it's the right one and it's not busted. And hopefully nothing gets stuck in you, except for a COVID vaccine, because you know, let's encourage people to get a booster. But how about this? I'm going to give you one more, basically. And the reason why I brought regulation and regulatory bodies up is exactly what you kind of touched on just briefly, which is when it comes to roles and responsibilities, even in organizations. Because when it comes to quality assurance, when it comes to manufacturing excellence, when it comes to process excellence as well, or even organizational excellence, you need to have kind of a direct hand or kind of a direct influence on the process itself and the backing of everyone else, right?
Yeah.
But how would you, go ahead.
I don't know. How do you? That's a great question. I think it depends. We should get someone on who does this as a guest. Future episode, people, I promise to find someone who does audit and quality inspections.
Actually, I might even go.
Maybe we both know people.
We do. We do.
Probably both know people.
Yes. And you know what? That's actually really great. And because especially right now with Industry 4.0 kind of coming in, audit and inspection becoming more digitized as well.
Right.
It's becoming a really big question. Maybe something for our next episode for sure.
Yeah, that is a good point. I have two minds. You reminded me of something, and I have strong opinions about it. There's a lot of people.
There's a lot of people. Let's start with one. The first mind.
The first mind. There's a lot of people who want to reduce the cost of assurance and reduce the cost, like make assurance automatic. But the problem, and so you find a lot of companies, especially in IT and tech-focused industries, that want to sell an automatic, almost like fire and forget, make everything perfect and tell you when things are not perfect. Kind of in that style of Ansible, but they have it all pre-plumbed for you. They know everything that can go wrong, and they tell you when anything is wrong. Mm-hmm. They don't say that last sentence, but they kind of dance around it, because this is the second mind. Once they say that central point, we know everything that will go wrong and we will tell you, it becomes clear that that is not a realistic claim. Mm-hmm. And in security especially, you have a history of companies that become really good at solving a problem of the day. Mm-hmm. So IDS and IPS are a great example of, like, 15 years ago, but actually probably only 10.
That's okay.
And then the problem stopped happening. And then their whole business model died, except for compliance focused people and very old people. But now the problem is config assurance in the cloud. Is your S3 bucket configured correctly to only allow correct access? And you log into Amazon and you look at the dashboard and it says, it's got this blinky light thing, and it says, oh no, your S3 is misconfigured. Well, it's not really, right? Even the best minds at AWS, in their attempts to write and deliver detective Poka Yokes for IT systems in their cloud, they don't know everything about what you're doing, and they will always miss some, and often a good chunk of failure modes that are possible within what you've built.
And this is something that is really important. So an example I have from Shell, at least, is that when it came to manufacturing excellence and other departments that were closely linked to the plant, they were on the plant side, because you had to have that local knowledge. You had to have that local connection to actually detect exactly what's going to go wrong eventually, and then build up to it. There's even something called, I believe, the butterfly model that someone in the HSSC department even showed me, that is supposed to kind of detect and future block different things. I forgot if it was the butterfly model or something else. I definitely would love to talk to him again.
That sounds fascinating. I've heard similar models, and you can almost imagine, like, from that quote, I don't know if it's a direct quote about, from Jurassic Park about the wings and the storm and the future, but you can imagine if you've got a long production stream, and if you think of the thought and the work in progress of IT change in an organization like AWS or SAP, an early mistake is going to cost so much, and so it's, maybe worth more to stop it early.
And I guess that's why they called it the butterfly model, based on the butterfly effect, actually.
Okay. My suspicion was correct. All right, good.
Well, at least I remembered that. I can't believe I remembered something from 10 years ago in something that was completely out of my, let's say, knowledge capacity. But I guess I'm happy about that. I'm gonna definitely try to research that again, because it's an interesting model. It's for safety in manufacturing, but you can definitely see a lot of Poka Yoke in there.
We forgot to talk about safety. You talk about safety.
I'm going to talk about safety, sure. Safety is all about prevention, isn't it?
Yeah. And detection.
And detection.
Also, anything you can do to make sure someone doesn't die. Like, what are some
holding a
examples?
handrail, which was completely drilled into our heads when we were working on a plant site. You got to hold the handrails. You got to hold the handrails. That is a preventative measure, isn't it? For me, that's a Poka Yoke, or I should say Baka Yoke, because you do feel like you do feel like an idiot if you slip and you hurt yourself. But these things do happen.
Right.
And
or lockout, key out.
Yes.
Is that what they call it?
Maybe.
So explain it.
I'm not too sure actually what you're talking about, but you're talking about the one with the microwave. If the microwave is open, it doesn't operate.
No, like, all right. So if you are going into a dangerous place, like you're going into a furnace to do maintenance, you have a little key and a lock, and you lock. There's a little place for you to put a lock that prevents anyone from turning the furnace on. And this prevents you from getting toasted like a little marshmallow. And what an amazing, simple, very cheap way of stopping the maintenance guy from getting roasted. Like, excellent example of a Poka Yoke.
Okay. Definitely from kind of my experience, I haven't seen that, but what I've seen is an automated sort of Poka Yoke, where when there is maintenance, you just shut down one part of the plant and just focus on it, and then just change the whole process and system through it. But that's still well, I like the lock Poka Yoke because it probably would prevent a lot of things too.
Right. Yeah. There's a whole cottage industry. I know about it because as a security professional, I watched the lock picking lawyer when in my spare time, and he's picked a fair number of those, but they're not designed to be unpickable. They're designed to stop people who aren't attentive, and it does very well with that.
And I like that actually. So Dylan, I would say that we've had quite the nicest tangent talking about Poka Yoke and talking about potential next episodes when it comes to root cause analyses and when it comes to everything else. Any last words for your last supper? And it's going to be egg yolks, by the way, because we keep talking about Poka Yoke instead of Poka Yoke.
Maha, we've been talking a lot about Poka Yokes in a mechanical sense, or even a user interface. I think there's a lot of potential opportunity kind of in the Alcoholics Anonymous space for maybe less formal or less concrete Poka Yokes for people to apply in their daily lives. Can you think of any, or do you have some that you do or seen people do that could provide a lot of value?
So this is actually a really interesting question, because from a human developmental point of view, if you want to change a habit, changing habits takes a lot of effort, and it's not something that happens in a day, right? We have a lot of books like Atomic Habits that got really popular. And what do they actually teach you? They teach you to be able to break down things into simple steps. And to know, for example, again, to know yourself well enough to know what's going to prevent you from doing something, and to actually add additional steps that might help you. So one thing, for example, that is really popular in the book that a lot of people preach about is putting your gym shoes in your gym clothes, for example, at the side of your desk, and just slowly kind of not forcing yourself, I should say, but just slowly putting your shoes on at 1 o'clock, for example, every day, And then through that, just start building a process up. If the process is supposed to also adding kind of those steps is supposed to actually prevent you from missing a lot of other steps, if that makes sense. So I don't know if that's the best example of a Poka Yoke, but for me, it sounds like it, because it's preventing you're adding additional steps to prevent a bigger mistake from happening. And it's supposed to help you manage change. And it's supposed to help you, again, change the habit eventually, i.e. reach that zero. What was it called, actually? Let me see. Zero quality assurance that was preached in the book as well. Yeah,
right. That is the utopia we all dream of. I like that one. I like that one. I think about how I can stop myself from doing the things I don't want to do. I know of people who uninstall Facebook because they want to remove the temptation to browse it on their to remove the temptation. It's not exactly a Poka Yoke because it's not stopping a human, it's kind of stopping a human process from doing something worse, but
it's a preventative for sure.
It is a preventative, yeah. I'd be really curious about this space and what opportunities. I guess maybe this is a great opportunity for our audience. If you all have ideas in this space, what works for you in preventing yourself, even with simple things, simple mechanisms, preventing worse mistakes or preventing higher cost ongoing issues, I would love to hear about them. Please hit us up.
Yep. That sounds really good to me too. I would love to hear a lot of stories, even if it's about preventing pasta from boiling over.
That's a good one.
Well,
I might have one.
Ooh, tell me.
Next time.
Well, sounds really good. Thank you. So thank you everyone for joining us on today's episode, exploring Poka Yoke. If you'd like to learn more, check out our show notes below, where we would have links to some of the books that we've talked about. If you'd like what you heard, don't forget to click subscribe, like, and comment, and let us know about some of your Poka Yokes that you do in your life. And thanks for listening. And until then, see?
That wasn't too hard.